Right, Councillor Govindia, please note Councillor Govindia and Osborne have asked to speak for up to 10 minutes on this paragraph, and I have agreed that these requests take place. So, Councillor Govindia, if you would like to commence, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The paragraph builds on a solid record of achievement, and it proposes a freeze on council tax for the next year. Over the last decade, this council tax, Wandsworth's council tax has gone up by less than 1% a year. And to our residents, this is not a surprise. They are well used to us looking after their interests. And the fundamental reason why low tax is core part of our DNA is because we do not believe in taking a penny more from our taxpayers than we need to. We don't need to go broadcasting, why am I keeping Wandsworth's low council tax? Wandsworth residents already know the answer to that, because we are the real low tax party and the rest are false. They also know that this borough, unlike Labour boroughs around London, has council tax at a level half theirs, and in cases even more than half theirs, even lower than half theirs. Our council tax wasn't born yesterday, it was born 35 years ago, and I think perhaps Mr. Ward's policies might have had something to help us win the 1978 election. But on winning that election, we vowed that never again would our residents be sent a bill from this town hall that asks for a penny more than we need. Proposals before us also sets a balanced budget, and that balanced budget doesn't come about by magic either. We have worked hard at finding the savings to repair the damage done to this country's finances by the last Labour government. And over the lifetime of this administration, we have saved 85 million, of which almost 18 million was saved in the last year alone. The party opposite claims that it too believes in balanced budgets, but as Councillor Johnson's question observes, that despite opposition whip saying that they have a plan and they would make the savings but not the same ones as you do, we have yet to hear from them what those might be. As Councillor Caddy's question at the last council meeting, the written question, shows that the opposition's failed to support £29 million of savings, which would have equated to a 66% increase in council tax. So there is some conversion to belief in low tax. I don't think so. Residents of Wandsworth wouldn't think so either. Every time there is a council election, the Labour Party often goes for stunts and things. So they come up with stories about how they'll raise the council tax, then lower the council tax, and then freeze the council tax, or freeze with a little bit extra. And this is the party that resorts to stunts and anything that might help them win elections. As for stunts, I think some colleagues will remember a stunt a while ago in a local hostelry where one of the Labour leaders decided to use the menu board to teach everyone about how to be financially prudent. Well, they didn't win that election, did they? And this time what we have is a grandly titled Independent Commission on Wandsworth Council Budgeting. Independent, Councillor Grimston? Don't think so. Annex 1 of the report gives each member's biography. What it doesn't say, well, it says that Mr. Ward was deputy leader of the GLC. True, but who's deputy? He was deputy leader to that well-known tax cutter, Ken Livingstone. Mr. Daniels, with his 14-year record as chief executive of Brent, well, the council tax goes up from £493 to £1,059. Some record of achievement. 76 pages later, the report says nothing. And I hope they didn't pay too much for it, because it's certainly not value for money. And how dare the authors tell us that we should do it the Brent way? This is the Brent Council, which is otherwise known as Barmy Brent. If Brent is the model, then our library users are grateful that we didn't follow it. They closed 6 libraries to save £1 million. We kept all our libraries open and saved £1.4 million. If Brent is the model, the residents will be pleased that we don't have a hologram in our one-stop counter greeting people as they did. Because we believe local government is a people business, not a virtual people business. And if Brent is the model of the saving on office costs, well, they can be, can't they? They saved £4 million on office costs, but we spend just below £4 million on office costs. No wonder we can't save £4 million on office costs. So let's also look at the Workers' Party of Brent. How does it deal with its staff? Well, 32% of Brent's staff left because of redundancy. Similar figure here is 10%. What sort of management plans for a downturn in that sort of a way? What sort of management leaves their staff dangling and makes these capricious decisions for staff without forward planning? Well, if Brent is a model, then our tenants will be very grateful that we haven't followed it, because they don't run their housing services. They have detached themselves from their tenants. And opposition is often proud of talking about the cooperative council next door. That too doesn't look after its tenants. They palm them off to somebody. We, on the other hand, have made our commitment to our tenants, and that commitment we have kept consistently. Both these two boroughs have giant waiting lists, highest number of people in temporary accommodation, highest proportion of their stock in voids, and in case of Lambeth, the second highest record in rent arrears. That's not a model our residents want us to follow. These are authorities that can't be bothered to let houses to people who need them, and when they let them, can't be bothered to collect the rents. That's not our model. And I don't need strictures from Mr. Daniels to find ways of running this council. You might want Brent, but we are Wandsworth, and we are proud of it. The recipe in the report says that they will save £20 million over 4 years, and yet we need to save nearly 3 times that amount in half the time. So there is already a black hole in their report. And yet the report claims that claims that all proposals are fully costed and independently verified and fit for purpose. Well, I hope you haven't paid the invoice yet. They talk about selling the town hall and moving to some nondescript office block. It'd be ever so efficient. Well, where is the civic pride? Where is the sense of history in that? What a soulless vision that they bring forward of a future working in soulless offices with faceless bureaucrats with little loyalty to the borough and its residents. Mr. Mayor, I despair that opposition's embrace of this world of management consultants and quick fix merchants. They have lost their way. And when Councillor Belton has said several times in this council about his criticism of successive governments of all colours, that they have denuded local authority of powers, taken away their tools, and turned them into service processes, I agree with him. Just because Whitehall says so, we don't have to roll over. We dare to be different here, and we are different. I'm proud of it. But the opposition seems to have actually lost that vision of a local authority that does things. Mr. Mayor, we are not just freezing council tax. We are dreaming dreams of a better future for our residents. Unprecedented growth in Nine Elms, in Wandsworth Town Centre, in Putney Town Centre, all made possible by this council. A Northern Line extension with £1 billion private funding, all because of this council's commitment to growing our economy. Renewal in Roehampton, renewal in Winstanley, because we want to improve the life chances of our most deprived community, and all made possible by the excellent credit rating. And why do we have that? It's because we have a track record of sound financial management. We have failing unemployment in the borough, but we want to bring employment to the most difficult to reach groups. Our work match scheme, barely 6 months old, has already provided 50 jobs to our residents. But we want more. We have ambitions. We're not ordinary. We have a mission that the growth brings training, jobs, and opportunities to Wandsworth people. We are bringing every influence Mr. Mayor, I will finish. We are bringing every influence to bear on improving this borough. What the opposition party seems to have lost is ideas. They have no passion. And maybe I'm wrong. They have passion for a bog-standard council. They have passion for following others, daring not to be different, passion for being mundane, passion for just good enough staff, for just good enough drive, just good enough commitment, for just good enough pay. Mr. Mayor, we are different.
Councillor Carpenter. Councillor Carpenter.
Madam Mayor, I rise to support the Labour Group's amendment to the budget for 2014-15 set out in the paper. The leader is misguided in his assertion that, I quote, Wandsworth Labour is intellectually bankrupt, and if it ever came to power, it would make the council financially bankrupt with its uncosted pledges and short-term thinking, unquote. The proposals put forward in this amendment are based on the recommendations of the Independent Commission on Wandsworth Council Tax. They have been fully costed by the Commission based on information provided by Wandsworth.
Will the member step aside and allow me to make an intervention?
Credits in his report. No, I won't take an intervention. Far from being short-term thinking, the proposals are centred on long-term transformational change of the Council's operations, rather than the successive rounds of salami slicing favoured by the Tory administration. The Independent Wandsworth Commission is not the only group to come to this conclusion. The Local Government Innovation Task Force has come to a similar conclusion in their recent report for change. Now, why are Wandsworth Tories so opposed to embracing transformational change? I think the answer is rooted in their philosophy. Some of you will know that I'm a graduate in science. One of the seminal works in this area is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. In it, he looked at the way worldview or paradigm changed to another. For example, from the sun going round the earth to the earth going round the sun, or from Newtonian to Einsteinian mechanics. He argued that rather than the new theories being adopted by way of rational debate, as one would expect, in fact, they were adopted only as the old guard died and were replaced by younger adherents to the new paradigm. The same is true of politics. When they came to power 36 years ago, Wandsworth Tories had fresh, new ideas. Today, they have the same ideas. They are trapped in a Thatcherite time warp. No one seems to have noticed that Mrs. Thatcher is no longer in power, or indeed that she is actually dead. Deader than the undead on the opposition benches. Occasionally, someone with new ideas, like Councillor King, who comes along. Now, I don't agree with his ideas, but at least he's got some. What's happened to him? He's been so stifled by the Wandsworth way that he's fleeing to the Antipodes, far away from it as possible. Now, Wandsworth Tories are led by a group of men, and it is largely men. 8 out of 9 cabinet members are men, and I won't mention the 9th, which is not here. They've been in power too long. The Wandsworth way has lost its way. You've only got to look across the river to Hammersmith and Fulham and the Tri-Power Initiative to see where the fresh thinking is coming from, to see why Wandsworth Tories are no longer the poster boys of modern conservatism. New thinking demands new people. The tired old faces on the benches opposite are no longer fit for purpose. Wandsworth deserves better. Its residents are being shortchanged by an administration that is incapable of getting out of the rut it got into 36 years ago. Madam Mayor, today we put a new prospectus to the people of Wandsworth. Same council tax, different priorities. No more salami slicing cuts, but transformational change. Working with other boroughs and other parts of the public sector to share services, management and procurement. Bringing our office accommodation and information technology into the 21st century, building 1,000 new social homes, and giving a better deal to tenants and leaseholders. Councillor Govindia, you were the future once. We are the future now.
Mr. Mayor, an obvious point of personal explanation. If you are the future, I don't want to be part of it.
Councillor Caddy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Well, apparently we're all now united in the idea that we need to freeze council tax this year. But do let's remember that the reason that we can is because of the strategy and decisions of the Conservative group and the incredible efforts and hard work of the staff of this council. So given that we all agree on council tax, it would be very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the difference between the two parties is just a difference of priorities. It isn't.
Would you take a very brief intervention?
No.
I just wanted to know which are the. I just wanted to. Well, I'm adopting the council. I'm adopting the Councillor Locker proposal from last time around.
I'm just adopting Councillor Carpenter's approach to interventions.
Councillor Caddy, please continue, Councillor Caddy.
It's a difference in capabilities. Labour voted against or abstained on 30 million of savings over the past 4 years. That would have increased Band D council tax by £256, an increase of 66%. The future is going to be just as challenging as the past 4 years. We're the only party to trust with making sensible, achievable savings whilst protecting frontline services. This council has saved just over £85 million over 4 years. That's around 30% saved off our available cost base. Now, by any standards, that is a hugely difficult task, and I think it's a testament to the skills and the professionalism of the staff here at this council that they have delivered this level of savings. Savings on this scale haven't and can't be achieved by salami slicing. They have been achieved by a measured, strategic approach. We're protecting frontline services, reducing back-office costs, and will continue to explore all options for savings, including working with other boroughs, businesses, and the third sector. There is no institutional bias against shared services or collaborative procurement, but I have to say that the devil is in the detail of this kind of scheme, and I've spent enough time working with the NHS, for example, to realise that size and scale doesn't automatically produce procurement efficiencies. That's not to say that we shouldn't look at all sensible options. Of course we should, and we will continue to. But the idea that the Labour Party have come across some kind of magic bullet that we haven't spotted is just totally disingenuous. My personal experience in the private sector has taught me that genuine cost savings are hard to find, especially without damaging the services that you offer your customers. So what sort of shape are our frontline services in? Well, our overview and scrutiny committees continue to closely monitor frontline performance, and there's little evidence of a decline. Just a couple of small examples. 84% of residents in the 2013 residents' survey were satisfied with the council's performance, and in the key frontline areas of children's services and adult social care, they recorded fewer complaints in 2012 and 2013 than the previous year. But actually, this debate shouldn't just be about cost savings and retrenchment. We should also be trumpeting the actions that we take to champion the borough, to make it a great place to invest, to attract businesses, create jobs, and revitalise flagging areas of the borough. We've got a great record on this. And as I've talked about before, a superb example is our plan for the regeneration of Roehampton and Battersea. The result of our strategy is that we will have a much leaner, more flexible structure, which will be able to respond to future changes. It's very difficult to predict what will happen in the future, and a council that has in place a nimble, streamlined structure is going to be in the best position to be resilient in the face of future changes. Most of the voters that I speak to on this subject say similar things. They want a council who they can trust to make the tough choices necessary to maintain excellent frontline services at a low cost. We've shown that we can do that. By not supporting 30 million of savings over the last 4 years, Labour showed that they can't. Their recent independent report just doesn't stack up. I would have loved in this speech to rebut every false assumption and misleading assertion, but I only had 5 minutes. Suffice it to say, they can't just suddenly vary staff contracts, and they should know that. A suggestion to reduce reserves further, despite acknowledging huge risk areas for the future, is just typical. And a rhetorical 20 million over 4 years conjured from unspecified shared service arrangements just won't cover the funding gap. Track record is important. I wouldn't bet on Labour being able to manage this council responsibly, so I would urge you to vote down this amendment.
Okay. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wanted to take the time this evening to tell the councillors in the Chamber a little bit more about the independent report published today by the Commission on Wandsworth Council Tax, whose work helped the Labour Group provide the realistic and affordable budget that we've laid before you this evening. And I wanted to start by briefly...
Will the member allow an intervention?
Yes.
I thank him. The key thing that's really bizarre for all of us on this side, because we can all count, is that Mr Buss's most optimistic numbers are that the minimum savings that this council is going to have to make over the next few years is £40 million. Now, the best you've come up with is £20 million, and those are pie in the sky, but let's just give you those for a minute. Can you tell us how you're going to fill in the other £20 million black hole?
Councillor Daly.
The Commission, I want to start briefly by addressing Councillor Gavinia's remarks about the Commission's independence, which were recorded on the Local Gov website today, and we've heard a lot of in this chamber here. The Commission included the former Chief Executives of the London Development Agency, London Councils, and Brent Council, as we've heard a lot about tonight. And actually, I think it's a bit disappointing that most of what we've heard tonight is about how this Commission is all about Brent Council, and look at what Brent Council has done. One member of the committee was a former Chief Executive of Brent Council and has extensive experience in local government. He wasn't the chair, he was a member, and he certainly wasn't recommending to us that we turned Wandsworth into Brent Council. So you've massively simplifying the audience. But each of these people have held roles at the highest levels in local government in which they've been required to keep their personal political beliefs to one side. And I think it's a bit insulting that you don't give them credit for doing so. Although the Commission's terms of reference were set by the Labour Group, their work was carried out independently of us, whether or not you want to accept that. Indeed, the report does include praise for the way the majority party ran the council 20 years ago, sentiments which I'm sure not all of my colleagues on this side of the chamber agree with. While Councillor Govindia dismisses the report as partial and accuses the Labour Group of being intellectually bankrupt, his refusal to provide a response to most of the evidence-based points raised in the report reaffirms the Commission's assertion that Wandsworth is stuck in the Wandsworth knows best mentality. Councillor Govindia's belief that Wandsworth is, I quote, a byword for efficiency and low tax is quite simply out of date. Wandsworth is not even a byword...
Mr Mayor, having been mentioned several times, resisted rising before, but to do now, I think the test of our record of efficiency will be delivered to you on the night of the 22nd of May.
Councillor Daly, I'd like to continue.
As a point of order, can you ask him, the leader what standing order that related to, like you did with us when we...
He basically asked if...
Sorry, Madam Mayor, you're not always impartial as the Mayor.
Councillor Daly, will you continue, please?
India's belief that Wandsworth is a byword for efficiency and low tax is out of date. Wandsworth is not even a byword for efficiency and local tax in neighbouring Tory boroughs, such as Westminster, Kensington and Chelsea, boroughs which have moved on over the last few years while Wandsworth has stayed stuck in the past. Let me give you one example. In 2011-12, the CEO of Kensington and Chelsea was earning more than the CEO of Wandsworth. By 2012-13, he was earning significantly less, and he was now joint CEO of both K&C and Hammersmith and Fulham. Meanwhile, we'd increased ours by 8%. Madam Mayor, the Independent Commission's report identifies a number of areas in which Wandsworth has failed to keep pace with the times. In particular, it highlights Wandsworth's failure to embrace shared services in the manner that Hammersmith and Fulham, Kensington and Chelsea and Westminster are doing through the Tri-Borough Initiative, an initiative that is predicted to save those boroughs some £40 million by 2016. The report also points out Wandsworth's failure to embrace joint procurement wholeheartedly, as demonstrated successfully by the West London Alliance. If Wandsworth was really a byword for efficiency and low tax, I imagine it would have people queuing up at its door to take part in such arrangements. The fact that we've not embraced this way of doing business suggests that either Wandsworth continues to take the arrogant view that it can do it better alone, and it would seem Councillor Govindia has reasserted that once again tonight, or, as my good colleague here recently said, it's actually become the wallflower at the disco, who no one wants to dance with anymore. Madam Mayor, what you see before you in our alternative budget this evening is a practical, fully costed, financially responsible plan to bring Wandsworth into the 21st century. Our proposals recognise that resources are scarce, hence our spending plans are modest. But they demonstrate our commitment to a low council tax, and this line that Councillor Govindia comes out with every line, Wandsworth has said they'll raise it, they'll lower it, they'll keep it the same.
Mr. Mayor, just a point of personal explanation, of course. I say that they raised it, proposed to raise it, they are proposed to lower it, and proposed to freeze it, because those are facts, those are realities. I am quoting what the record is. They go for stunts and headlines, not reality.
We've had a consistent policy over the last...
Councillor Daly, you asked me a question. In fact, you have, next but one to you, a seminal historian of your group in this borough, and perhaps you should ask him the answer.
Councillor, look, will you both sit down, please? Will you both sit down? Councillor Govindia, have you finished? If you'd like to complete.
We demonstrate our commitment to a low... Our proposals demonstrate our commitment to a low council tax in Wandsworth and a different set of priorities, a set of values that believes protecting frontline services is more important than protecting exorbitant pay. A platform that recognises the need to change the way local government works in a world of much scarcer resources, rather than clinging on to old ideologies whose time is past. The majority party's same old rhetoric that Labour cannot be financially responsible no longer holds water. Our proposals are not only financially responsible, but reflect the needs and wishes of our residents in a new age of local government. I commend our amendment to the Council.
Before we move on, Councillor Daly, when we had intervention, the clock was stopped, all right? And so you actually have had your complete 5 minutes. And Councillor Govindia was mentioned, and so because of that, that's why the personal explanation. So I really do think I have given you fair time. Councillor Grimston.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I mean, I have to say, I think we should be fair on this side of the chamber. We have indeed seen quite a lot of innovation from the other side tonight, and we should recognise that. I've never before seen a councillor in this chamber take an intervention and then completely and absolutely ignore it. And I think if that's a new way of doing business, I think I'm interested in how it's going to go. Mr. Mayor, though, I have to say I'm quite fond of a lot of the traditions of Wandsworth. One that I've become particularly fond of in my 20 years as a councillor is the 4-yearly cycle on which the group opposite spends 3 3/4 of those years opposing everything that we do to try and do this, and then for 3 glorious months on a 4-yearly cycle leading up to May, from February to May, they emerge, I think of them kind of as mayflies, spending most of their life cycle grubbing around in the dirt, and then emerging as a rather beautiful pro-efficiency, pro-low taxation butterfly, until the days of May, when one by one they die and a new generation comes back to follow the same futile life cycle. But, Mr. Mayor, it is different this year because we do have this splendid independent commission report. And I was accused by one of my colleagues the other day of being academic in my approach to things. And I plead guilty to that because that's the way I do look at things, and indeed that is what I am. And when faced with a report like this, of course, I go into it and I start looking for, firstly, what the scope is. And I think the scope and the ambition is really caught on page 10, where the report says key budget savings, one of which involves a supposed saving of £100,000. I'm not knocking that. It's a good start towards the 29 million of cuts the Labour Party has opposed in the course of this administration. One of them is about taking more money out of reserves, although elsewhere in the report it says that's not sustainable. But the most interesting, and I guess the one that I would hope was the most eye-catching, is the business of reducing senior managers' pay in this authority. Now, as anyone who was writing a report like this with the exception of the people who did write the report like this, would do, is go and actually look for evidence for the sort of assertions they're making. So I actually, having had a spare couple of hours, I went to the list of chief executive pay for 2010-2011, which was published in one of the newspapers at the time, and contrasted the authorities which had the top 10 paid chief executives with the authorities that had the bottom 10 paid chief executives. Now, the first thing I say to the Labour Party, and they won't be surprised in this, there was a systematic difference in the levels of council tax being raised by these two groups. It was only about 2%. That might be enough to get lost in the noise, but there certainly was a difference. What might not be quite so comfortable for the Labour Party is it was the authorities who paid their chief executives the most money who had the systematically lower council taxes. I was just looking it up at tier authorities. And those who paid their chief officers the lowest were the ones who had the highest levels of council tax. It worked out at around £20, but it would mean that an authority like Wandsworth could spend something like £2 million more on its senior management team, and our council taxpayers would still be paying less. Don't smile, Mr. Martin. Don't smile, Mr. Martin. I'm not proposing that as a policy, but nonetheless, it is something that brings out. But of course, it's not just about council tax. I also looked at the comprehensive performance assessment scores for those 20 authorities. Older members will remember that that was the way that the previous Labour government judged councils on a 1-star to 4-star scale. Among the 10 top paying authorities, 9 of those 10 were in the top 2 categories, 3 or 4. Nationally, the average was 80%. Among the bottom 10 payers, only 70% of those were in the top scores. The average score for the top 10 payers was 3.3. The average score for the lowest was 2.8. And that absolutely is statistically significant. That is way out of what could happen by chance. Most disgracefully of all, the second worst paid chief authority in the country was the chief executive of Doncaster Council, the sole survivor of that swathe of dreadfully appalling Labour councils that blighted local government through the 1980s and 1990s. An authority which has had children's services removed from it uniquely because of the dangers that that authority were putting their children in. It's not just a matter of money. It never has been for the Conservative group in this council. It is also noticeable how service fails when you don't pay your senior staff right. Now, I'd love to engage in the argument put in the report by Labour Party to explain this, but there isn't one. In fact, there's practically no argument for anything. I've referred to the report, which is actually an officer paper, or officer tabloid file, as I guess we're going to have to call them in future, that is quoted as one of the very few things that to back up what they're talking on London living wage. In their discussion on performance-related pay, they quote a single 2003 paper, an 11-year-old paper they had to go back before they could find one that supported their point of view. There's just nothing at all in this paper. And I go back to the word independent. I guess that the independent people who check their figures, was it Gordon Brown, perhaps, Ed Balls, that sort of a person? I would say there is one very important way in which the Labour Party can rightly say that this is an independent report. It is entirely and absolutely independent of anything on planet Earth.
Councillor Belton.
Madam Mayor, I suspect that even Councillor Grimston, if he was laying out a programme or a platform for a good political authority, would claim that the tax that it was capable of raising and was therefore held accountable for covered a significant proportion of its expenditure. We're now in the slightly ludicrous position where council tax covers about 5% of gross expenditure, and our capability of raising it or lowering it on either side is so near to zero as makes no difference. Actually, if an expansionist Tory council wanted to raise council tax right now, short of going to a referendum, the most it could do would be to raise it £18 a year, 25p a week, because legislation now says you can't raise it. And because you can't raise it, and indeed you're subsidised from not raising it by a freeze grant, you also daren't lower it. And you daren't lower council tax because if you go to a lower base, then you're really stuck in future years. The ironic consequence of this is for Councillor Govindia to say we don't take money unnecessarily from our taxpayers' pockets, is that this year we're putting 18.48 million, I think it is, anyway, just shy of 18.5 million into the reserves to safeguard against the future cuts positions that we all know is coming. So ironically, we end up in the situation, it is really ironic, under current government legislation, that whereas they could have used it in the past, in an election year, to lower council tax by £100, £200, and just imagine what political bunts that would be, and I think the figure they could lower it by is certainly over 100. They refrained from doing it by the government's own constricting legislation. So we've got this peculiar situation where both sides are going through a bantering evening, great fun and all that sort of stuff, all a lot of nonsense, when actually the flexibility either side would have is absolutely minimal. Now, the result of this is that Councillor Grimston knows perfectly well, as do all the rest, that we may vote, we have voted, if you say so, against £30 million of cuts, but you don't distinguish in the least bit between where we've voted against the commas and full stops of a cut and saying that we would have done it another way, and those where we would have genuinely opposed. We have no true measure of actually what we would have opposed, and it's pointless you trying to make it up just as a charade. Now, I haven't got enough time, actually, but I could give it a go. Cut the use of bed and breakfast. That was 4 million not long ago, but I will stop there. So we're in this very odd situation, and this is all frighteningly about the attack on local government nationally. And I'm very much afraid that my side doesn't say very much about that any more than your side does. The only person in this chamber to have hit the headlines, and I do give him credit for this, for telling that madman at so-called communities and local government, what an idiocy to call yourself Minister for Communities. What an arrogance. I think it was a Labour invention in the first place. I didn't like it then, I don't like it now. But at least Councillor Senior had the gumption to get up and say at some point or other that you can't carry on doing this because the services will be cut. And that's where, of course, your big fantasy is. Your big fantasy is that the service on the front will not be affected. Now, how much anecdotal evidence do you want? Because certainly in a ward like Latchmere, I can give it to you, and I know some of my colleagues can elsewhere, of the poor actually being driven out of inner London. There is plenty of it now. It's coming through almost daily. They are being driven out, the headlines of the paper today, to Grimsby in one particular instance. They're being driven out all across London, and they're losing jobs. At a national level, we're faced with an environmental disaster because we've cut back on all sorts of things. And this government's saying, I remember, I'll be very brief, one rather frightening moment, frightening to me, when Councillor Lister was lauding the diminution of all services across the country. And that's what we're going for. And that's what I think is really sad. And actually, I don't enjoy this debate very much. It's all rather pointless and has very little to do with the reality of the people in Latchmere.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dawson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's obviously been a wide-ranging debate this evening, and I'd just like to spend a few minutes talking about services and how some of these savings have had to be made and are being made. Obviously, like other council departments, Children's Services is maintaining high-quality services as it seeks savings, which are really required by the government's need, desire, to ensure that we reduce the nation's deficit. And it is worth repeating again and again that we're reducing the deficit so that we deal with our country's debts and we safeguard our nation's economy for the long term. And it is worth repeating that constantly in these debates.
And the grudging semi-apologies apart, I'm afraid Labour still doesn't get it. And their track record, supported still by their union paymasters, suggests they never will. Councillor Grimston has already pointed out the slight different definitions about independent. I think also, listening to some of the contributions this evening, we've also got rather different definitions of financial responsibility and fully costed. So therefore, if I can just turn to services, obviously within children's services there's been a significant restructuring, particularly at managerial level. Councillor Govindia has already talked about the taking out of high-level costs within departments. The number of divisions is reducing, and obviously beyond that, the department is merging with the adult social services to form a new education and social services department. Now, already this evening, we've paid tribute to the work of Paul Robinson and Mary Evans for the families and residents of Wandsworth over many years, and the very strong legacy that they pass on to this new department, I think gives comfort to many of us in our belief that this new department offers opportunities. For example, more close working with health providers. It's already been demonstrated in the specification for the school nurse contract in recent months. Also, I think we should be looking for opportunities to further support as the most vulnerable and disabled youngsters move into their adult life. And I think those synergies and opportunities will exist in the new department. So significant restructuring of departments not only reduces spending, but offers further opportunities for improved services for our residents. Secondly, of course, market testing. And this evening there are proposals before the Council for the market testing of Wandsworth's highly regarded youth work services. A similar process to that which has already been mentioned this evening, successfully undertaken for our libraries, leading to the appointment of GLL. And again, as Councillor Govindia has pointed out, in 2010 we had 11 libraries. In 2014 we still have 11 libraries. Compare and contrast to many local authorities with how they're having to address issues. And we're also reporting this evening to Council the possible externalisation of lifelong learning, another strong service, with proposals being brought forward which will look at opportunities to build on the success of that team in a different service model. So market testing over the years has brought new service models, innovative thinking and value for money. And that's why Wandsworth Conservatives welcome such developments, whether that be through social enterprise organisations, staff mutuals, or contracts with the private sector. It contrasts rather with the Labour group that, quickly reading the Commission, seems to focus entirely on partnerships and cooperation with other public sector authorities. The other aspect, just to mention briefly, the willingness to adapt to changing needs and requirements. The success of the Family Recovery Project and the Troubled Families Programme demonstrates that as a leadership role the Council undertakes. And the report this evening on Bridge House, I think, points out how specialist providers can be used in some of the most challenging circumstances as we move to a different service model. Very briefly, one of the points in the Commission is about 1 o'clock clubs. But can I just point out that the changes we agreed were part of it's an integral part of the provision of free 2-year-old nursery places, and seeking to reverse changes of the 4 sites mentioned will involve cancelling leases, stopping investment, and an unravelling of a network of provision that early years have provided. So I think if that rather disingenuous proposal is typical, the whole thing is a rather opportunistic publicity stunt. Madam Mayor, I commend the Council tax report this evening. It is fiscally responsible, and it is to the benefit of the residents of Wandsworth.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Osborne.
I am struck by the frequency with which speakers on the other side of this chamber, and in particular the leader, refer to what happened in the past, 35 years ago in some instances. The Labour Party, 35 years ago. The Conservative Party, 35 years ago. My interest is primarily focused on the Labour Party and the Conservative Party today and how they do what's best for the people of Wandsworth today. And I want to just reiterate and reinforce something I've said already, actually, in committee in this council. But I say it again here to full council. We have no desire to drive up the council tax in this borough. The modern Labour Party in this borough is not interested. For a variety of reasons. There is one salient reason, actually, why we don't, and it's what you would expect of a Labour Party, and it's this. Council tax is one of the most regressive taxes ever invented. It has tightly packed gradations. It is easy on the very rich and tough on everybody else, in particular those who are least well off. Why on earth would we want to put that up? If you take a few examples, a high-flight, well-paid solicitor can expect to spend 1%, maybe less, of his income on council tax. But let's take a security guard, hard-working, stress-laden security guard. When he comes to pay his council tax, that's 5% of his income that he's paying. Don't want to go into that space and make that security guard's life harder than it already is. I want to keep council tax where it is. And I want to put this on the record today, so there is absolute avoidance of doubt in this debate. We commit to a distinctively low council tax and value for money services for the residents of Wandsworth. But we've already pointed out in the debate that actually the council tax is quite a small part of the overall budget these days. Nevertheless, it is important to make sure we don't waste any of the council tax income we get in this borough. And there is, of course, one particular piece of what I would call waste in the spending in this council. Performance-related pay. The bonus scheme. A wasteful use of money, of council taxpayers' money. Now, I suspect, it's clear in the answers we've had today and in some of the other work of that's been going on over recent weeks, how much is being spent on that bonus scheme. I suspect the council taxpayers of this borough have no idea how much is being spent. I suspect, actually, there are quite a lot of Conservative councillors in this borough who didn't realise how much money is being spent on that bonus scheme until very recently. It is £3 million. £3 million. Now, I dare say, and it's been inferred already this evening, that people are saying, oh, that's what all councils do. Oh, no, they don't. Let's just look around and see if we can find anything on the same scale. You can come close if you go to a Labour council, actually, Glasgow City Council, where they have an extensive performance-related pay system there. That's Glasgow City Council. They run an entire city of 600,000 people. This is little old Wandsworth we're talking about here, spending £3 million on its bonus scheme. It's been suggested in the debate tonight that that's how we keep the council tax down, by spending this £3 million on a bonus scheme. Really? Well, let's look around at that, shall we? Let's just have a look at Westminster City Council, another borough in London. There are a few other boroughs in London that have bonus schemes, modest versions of what we have. There's been a row recently in Westminster, actually, about their bonus scheme. Their bonus scheme paying £900,000 to senior staff there. But not £900,000 a year. That's £900,000 over 3 years. In other words, £300,000 a year. In other words, ours is 10 times as great as that in Westminster City Council. And yet their council tax is lower than ours. So it does not automatically follow that if you pay a bonus scheme, you're going to get a low council tax. It's been suggested in the debate tonight that you can't just alter people's contracts. No, you can't do it overnight. That is true. But you can renegotiate contracts, and you can phase out a performance-related pay scheme over a relatively short period of time. And actually, if we do look into the past a little bit in this council, the Conservative majority in this council has had no compunction in the past about renegotiating people's contracts. So it is not impossible to do it. Let me finish off by saying this. If we are going to save this money and stop this waste, then you've got to vote for our amendment. You've got to vote against this scandalous expenditure and support what we're proposing. Alternatively, if you're not going to vote for it, there is one other way that you could stop throwing money away like this, and that's by voting Labour at the next election. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Senior.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Some things, it seems, change. I think it's the first time tonight that Councillor Belton has ever said anything nice about me during a council meeting. But many things stay the same. I will allow you to make your point of explanation. I am deeply flattered. But, of course, many things do stay the same. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Once the Conservatives talk about hard decisions and hard choices, and as Councillor Grimston, in almost taking my line, said, every 4 years the Wandsworth Labour group try to convince us that they've suddenly become converts to low tax and efficiency, having spent the previous 4 years opposing many of the efficiency savings that we have proposed and have implemented. Now, of course, that sounds a little bit odd. It's a little bit like Jose Mourinho saying today he thinks some footballers are too vain. So we've had over the years all sorts of schemes from the Labour Party to justify what they're saying. They've talked about bottom-up reviews of expenditure, zero-based budgets. All these sorts of things have been put about in Labour Party literature, and the people of Wandsworth have ignored them and voted us back in again. This time we have something slightly different. We have a 72-page, immensely repetitive 72-page report issued by a so-called independent commission comprised largely of Labour worthies, which the Labour group have essentially adopted as their amendment to this motion tonight. And if we look at what's in it, there are the short-term measures. I'm sure we can argue about some of those things, and we've argued quite a lot tonight about executive pay. And all I would say in that is two things. It's first of all to say that the performance-related pay scheme does not apply just to the so-called fat cats of the council, but extends downwards to a very large number of other council staff. And secondly, I do find it a little bit odd that the Workers' Party tries to rip up the contracts of their own staff. But if you look at the big picture, that is actually the most worrying thing about this report. And it is worrying both for its ignorance and for its risk. It's ignorance of many of the things that the council is doing. You'd think that we do no shared services, yet we have shared services and purchasing for everything but from buying electricity to pensions administration to valuation services. It's ignorance, for example, of office accommodation. It talks about moving staff onto one site, when in fact there have been several papers to the Finance and Scrutiny Committee saying exactly that and explaining how that's going to be done and setting out a timetable for it and the considerable savings and capital receipts that will generate. It's worrying indeed talking about the need to move to flat structures, as if the Commissioner was entirely unaware of the large numbers of top management that have actually been removed from the Town Hall over the past few years. But it's also very worrying for its risks. It's very worrying for what it says about housing. You would have thought from what the report says that the Council has a dreadful record on the provision of social housing because its planning policies are wrong. Well, actual fact, last year this Council gave planning permissions for well over 1,200 social affordable housing units of various sorts across Wandsworth. Islington Council, Labour gave none. Lewisham Council, Labour gave 53, and Newham gave just over 80. By comparison, well over 1,200. The report seems entirely ignorant of that, but what it proposes instead is to either to spend all the HRA reserves and some more on building housing from our own money, or to borrow massively. Yet at the same time, it says it wants to freeze council rents. So what does that mean? Well, it must mean, in that case, that all the repairs in the HRA will be abandoned. But he also says it doesn't want to freeze rents in the election year. But next year is an election year. It's just typical of the way in which the report isn't properly thought through. But most importantly of all, as Councillor King pointed out, it is very clear to us that the financial challenges to this council are way in excess of the £20 million this report suggests could be achieved. And indeed, the Labour Party has so far done nothing to suggest what they would have done instead of the £20 to £29 million of savings that they either opposed or abstained upon. Contrast that, by comparison, with what the Conservative group in this council has been doing for the last 35 years. A solid programme of financial management that has brought low council tax, good management and good services. One that the electorate of this borough have always recognised, even when times have been very hard for the Conservative Party nationally, as being good for them. I have little doubt the electorate will recognise the same in a few weeks' time, and I urge you all to reject the amendment and to vote for the core proposal.
Thank you, councillors. Now, a recorded vote will now be taken on the amendment. The Chief Executive and Director of Administration will call the councillor's name in turn, and members should indicate whether they are for the amendment, against or abstaining.